Congratulations, Naval Systems Command, for being here with us today. Thank you, Dr. Winstrup. The Navy's 4 public shipyards, Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Virginia, Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard in Hawaii, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Maine, and Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Washington, face a number of challenges in completing ship maintenance on time and within budget. Wartime requirements, as we know, over the past decade have worsened the condition of our fleet, causing ships to require more maintenance than expected upon arrival at the shipyard. A few weeks ago, we received testimony about the Navy's optimized fleet response plan, which, among other things, seeks to provide a more sustainable force generation model and more predictability for ship maintenance. Today, I look forward to hearing about the shipyard's role in meeting the Navy's operational requirements and how they are responding to the maintenance and repair challenges that recent operations have put upon the fleet. Now I turn to the ranking member, Ms. Bordallo, for any opening remarks she may have, and again, we thank her for her leadership in HASC and here in the subcommittee. Madeline?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for arranging this hearing on our public shipyards. Admiral Whitney, thank you for being here today so early. I very much appreciate what you are doing to try to maintain and enhance the readiness of our fleet. I am hopeful that the OFRP and your plans with the shipyards can be implemented in a timely manner and will not suffer under a continuing resolution, government shutdown, or sequestration level budgets. I am particularly interested in hearing what steps the Navy is taking to bring shipyard staffing up to the levels needed to increase productivity. How are you getting 4,500 new employees up to speed in critical technical areas? And I also would like to hear specifics regarding infrastructure improvements for the public shipyards, including where the challenges lie, what is being done to meet those challenges, and how well funded the Navy's recapitalization plan is. We must reset our readiness that has been degraded by years of constant engagement and high operational tempo, and ensure a stable and a predictable funding stream is available for these programs. And I know the chairman and my colleagues on this subcommittee share that goal, and we look forward to hearing how you plan to ensure our readiness goals are met through engaging our public and private shipyards and intermediate maintenance repair facilities. And I yield back, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bordallo. Admiral Whitney, we now go to you for your opening statement.
Good morning. Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, and distinguished members of the House Armed Services Readiness Subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify about the Naval Shipyard's critical role in meeting the Navy's operational requirements. I am privileged to have worked in and around the Naval Shipyards for over 20 years. This includes the honor of having been the commander of a naval shipyard. Today, I am before you representing the more than 33,000 civilian and military, dedicated and patriotic professionals who give their life every day to serve our country and fix our ships. These heroes come to work, put on a hard hat and safety shoes, and stand ready to service our great Navy anytime, any place, to ensure our sailors are always ready to stand the watch. Today, I am prepared to discuss the challenges that this workforce faces to improve performance and reduce the maintenance backlogs at the naval shipyards that have prevented us from getting back to the fleet the ships that they urgently need, as well as discuss the initiatives that we are taking to address those challenges. The workforce at the naval shipyard is engaged. They are tackling the challenges and embracing the improvement initiatives every single day, and they work towards one goal: the successful delivery of ships back to the fleet. The 4 public shipyards, Portsmouth, Norfolk, Puget Sound, and Pearl Harbor, are owned and funded by the fleets and operated by the Naval Sea Systems Command. The naval shipyards ensure that the Navy has the essential and organic capability to perform cradle-to-grave service for our nuclear-powered aircraft carrier and submarines. The workforce provides the services that are vital to sustain the fleet's operational availability and ensure mission success. The naval shipyard performance has been challenged in the past 3 years due to increased workload that is coupled by an increased number of new and less experienced workers. In fiscal year 2014, the naval shipyards executed 4.7 million man-days of workload. This workload has continued to increase through FY15 and will increase through FY17, likely peaking in fiscal year 18. This increase has been caused in part by the high operational tempo of the fleet and extended deployments that has been described in previous testimony. The primary solution is to resolve the workload to workforce imbalance by increasing the workforce to the right level so that we can have a fighting chance to get the required maintenance completed on time and on budget. The solution set also includes training and developing the new workforce and its management team, as well as diligently working on process improvement. We will achieve success by utilizing our apprentice programs and other workforce development efforts in conjunction with productivity improvement initiatives. The challenge of the last 2 years has been hiring to an appropriate level across the naval shipyards. In FY13, the naval shipyards had about 29,000 full-time equivalents. With the impact of sequestration, a hiring freeze, and increased workload, accelerated hiring has been necessary. The FY16 budget supports an increase in the shipyard workforce to achieve 33,500 direct and indirect full-time equivalents. In 2014, this number, including private sector partner assistance, was determined to be the appropriate size workforce needed to execute the increasing workload and reset the workload to workforce imbalance. Shipyard availability performance, warfighter readiness, and fleet forward deployed presence are directly linked to the capabilities provided by the efficient operation of the naval shipyard facilities. Naval Sea Systems Command continues to prioritize the sustainment and recapitalization of the naval shipyard's infrastructure. Investments continue to focus on mission-critical facilities inside the controlled industrial area, which primarily include production shops, piers, wharves, dry docks, and supporting utility systems. Naval Sea Systems Command is focused on the naval shipyard's information technology systems as well. These systems are outdated and a challenge to support as we push to new cybersecurity standards. Naval Sea Systems Command is implementing solutions to the maintenance information systems to address critical cybersecurity vulnerabilities and increase workforce productivity. Overall, facility investments are prioritized to address the most critical capability, safety, productivity deficiencies associated with these mission-critical facilities. The hardworking, dedicated professionals across the naval shipyard stand with me to tackle these challenges face on. Our focus each and every day is to get our Navy ships back to sea when the fleet needs them in support of OFRP. Again, thank you for inviting me here today before this committee, and I thank you for your continued and crucial support of the naval shipyards. I'll be glad to take any questions that you have.
Admiral Whitney, thank you. I am going to come to my questions as other members have had their chances. We have a few members that have to leave a little bit earlier, so I will go now to Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Whitney, how do you envision the role of shipyards like the one on Guam, which is more of a hybrid between a public and a private yard? We essentially have established a government-owned, contractor-operated construct. So how does this contribute to supporting the OFRP and the backlog in ship maintenance?
The role of the naval shipyard's engagement with private sector partners is critical to the success of the shipyards, naval shipyards being able to execute their workload. Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard and Puget Sound Naval Shipyard both do maintenance on the island of Guam in support of the home-ported 688 submarines, as well as the SSGNs that come in for voyage repair periods. So the partnership is critical, and so we need to ensure that when, as we will likely discuss later, the role and the visibility of the total workload, we just need to make sure that that partnership is strong.
So you don't think that would add to the backlog, then? It would?
No, ma'am.
All right. Admiral Whitney, how do maintenance schedules for ships that support the carrier and expeditionary strike groups fit into the OFRP concept? And isn't it just as important that the maintenance for those ships is done in a timely and cost-efficient manner to ensure the readiness of the strike groups?
Yes, ma'am. So the focus of OFRP is that carrier strike group, and the naval shipyard piece of that equation is to ensure that the aircraft carriers are delivered on time. The The coordination then, therefore, is to make sure within the port that we have visibility of the workload, and we're partnering and making sure that that we are doing this in an aligned manner. So in order for the total strike group to be successful, we all need to be sharing and aligned in what that workload is and how it's going to be executed. Naval Shipyard piece of that, obviously, therefore, is the carrier, and the carrier has to deliver on time.
And I have a third question, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have. Much of our maintenance backlog has been driven by sequester level budgeting. Now, your future planning with OFRP revolves around funding being restored to the program at the President's budget levels. What would the impact be if you were faced with another round of sequester level funding? And additionally, what are the restraints of your funding if it comes from OCO instead of base funding?
So the impact on the naval shipyards to sequester level funding would be a repeat of what we experienced previously. We would face likely hiring freezes. We would reduce overtime. We would take risk on material procurements, those things that would ultimately end up in delays to availabilities inside the naval shipyards.
And maintenance, right?
Yes, ma'am. The backlog of maintenance would again continue to accrue. Mm-hmm. So we've articulated that before, and I would see no reason why the impacts would not be the same.
All right. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bordallo. Dr. Wenstrup, any questions, please?
I do have one quick question, and may not even be appropriate to answer it in this setting, to be honest with you. I think you probably, sir, have a great understanding of what readiness means and what you would feel would be 100% readiness within your jurisdiction. And like I said, it may not be appropriate to answer in this setting, but I would be curious to know what percentage of readiness you feel we are at right now.
That would be a hard one to answer. I would take that as a lookup, and for us as Navy to come back and give you a specific answer on that.
Well, I think it's very clear it's not 100% right now. Would you agree with that, sir?
Yes, sir.
When you consider you have a backlog of maintenance, how can we be 100%
yes, sir.
ready?
Agree.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here this morning and for your service.
Thank you, Dr. Wenstrup. We'll now go to Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, Ms. Bordallo asked my question about the sequester and coming up on this month, and just want to express my concern that we continue to work with you and the committee on coming up with a strategy. I think OFRP is a good start to deal with tough budget situations, but we need to get back to a situation where we're doing regular budgets over more than a year so that there's more dependability and more ability to plan. I want you to know that I have that in mind. And thank you for being with us today.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Peters. Ms. Hartzler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral. I was just wondering, you talked about the workforce and how you're plussing up the number of people that you're hiring to make up for the backlog. So what is the shipyards doing to address the relative inexperience of this workforce?
Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. So first off is a recognition that the new folks that we're hiring, there is a generational difference in the way that workforce learns. And so what we're addressing is different ways to train and develop. And there is a subtle distinction between the two. And where we're at is, whereas in the past, what the way that the workforce would have learned is more over the shoulder, down on the deck plate, learning how to do the work with an experienced graybeard kind of right behind them, helping them. What we're doing is we're creating work environments, mock-ups, as like to the real situation as we possibly can, where it's actually safe to fail. Learn through repetition, learn by doing, learn by actually them doing the work in a learning environment, and then going down and doing the work. And so it's more hands-on, it's more upfront, it's an investment, taking them kind of offline into almost like a boot camp kind of environment. And we're calling those learning centers. and each shipyard is sharing lessons learned across the 4 of them on how they're developing, how they're training in these learning centers, and we're seeing positive results. There's very clear results in each of the shipyards, bright spots as I call them, where the new workforce, when they actually go down and execute work, is executing at decreased durations on the job, high quality, and safety is phenomenal.
I'm a former vocational teacher, and I'm a big believer in career and technical education. So in the schools around the shipyards, are there any specific programs that help, that students can, in high school, take that will help feed into that?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. We've got great partnerships in each of the locations with vocational and technical schools. The apprentice programs that we have great relationships with local community colleges, and we are reaching way down into the high school, looking for that vocational kind of aptitude for folks to come on into the shipyards. For years and years and years, one of the anecdotes was, hey, if you don't do well in high school, you're going to end up in that shipyard. We've completely turned that around to that is a place where you want to go, and the skill sets that we need are evident wherever we are at.
Yeah, absolutely. So recently, 2 private shipyards in the Hampton Roads area, Newport News Shipbuilding and BAE Systems, announced plans to lay off 1,500 and 650 employees, respectively. Are these layoffs related to the Navy's plan to hire an additional 9,000 employees?
No, ma'am. This is workload related. In each of those specific companies. But we are collaborating, and so the visibility of the workload in the port is something that we've been working on relatively newly, but definitely diligently over the course of the last several months. And there are many places where we need the help. So when we were hiring up and are hiring up to that 33,500, that was not to the peak. We aimed below the peak because on the backside of the peak, we wanted to be in control of our decline in workload. And so there was an element of that peak that we needed and still need to continue to work with the private partners on the 3 availabilities that are going into the private sector. And for us on aircraft carriers, we've got several HII folks working right now on the Bush at Norfolk Naval Shipyard and Will on Truman, and also out west helping Puget Sound on the USS Nimitz right now. So we've got more work to do, but we're not going to get that workload peak done without private sector help.
I know we only have about 30 seconds left, but I'm just curious, of all the ships, what is the main area of maintenance? What is that takes the most time? And is the Navy looking at ways to decrease the maintenance in that area? So is it engine overhaul? Is it what would you say is the main highest maintenance area on a ship after it's been deployed?
That's actually very hard to
You have
nail
6
down.
seconds, so go ahead. No.
But each availability has what we call a critical and controlling path, and predominantly it is in, I'll call it a high skill area. It typically is something that is typically worn from wear, and it varies. So it's kind of hard to answer that question, but we definitely know as we develop the work package to what's going to get worked, we very clearly know what that critical path work is going to be.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mrs. Hartzler. Admiral, the Navy's come to this subcommittee before, and you've briefed us about your efforts to hire back workers that were lost during earlier rounds of the sequester. Can you give us an update on where you are in that process? Are you meeting your goals in hiring people back? And as you spoke of, you're trying to find that equilibrium to where we're not on that roller coaster ride of up and down workforce changes within the public yards. Can you reflect a little bit on that for us?
Yes, sir. So we are, as we ended this fiscal year, we were within 65 people of our goal. And as far as I'm concerned, we met our goal. So we'll be on track relatively easily to meet our goal in FY16, which was to get to that 33,500 by the middle of FY16 to give ourselves a little bit more lead angle on the training. And that includes the folks that we lost due to attrition during 2013 in the hiring freeze. So we are back on track with that.
We know that you all play out the different scenarios that you face with funding. Obviously, we know the scenarios if sequester comes back, but give us your perspective on where we are right now operating under a CR through December 11th. And then give us a scenario, too, if the Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decides to operate the remaining portion of this year under a CR. Can you give us those two scenarios, what it means for you operating under a CR to December 11th, and then what it would mean to you to operate for a CR for the remaining portion of the budget year?
Yes, sir. So operating under a CR for the first 3 months of the year is, I'll say it's manageable. We have a good site visibility of the workload and what it's going to take to execute that. If we go beyond the December timeframe, then it becomes much more of a challenge balancing the risk associated with the hiring, with overtime, with material procurements as we progress through that rest of the year. Again, also with an eye towards what is at us in 17. So we're constantly evaluating how we're going to execute the year. One of the fundamental things that we've changed within the last 5 years is we go through a very purposeful deep dive into what's about to happen in the future execution year, and we align between NAVC as the operator and the fleets on an availability by availability level of detail and issue a letter to the shipyards with what we call execution guidance. Anything that kind of causes risk, therefore, in that execution guidance is going to be a challenge and likely ends up being as a bow wave, and also piece of that bow wave, not just the work, but is the things that are going to be a degradation in performance. And so we're okay with the up to the December, but it's going to get very risky after that.
Thank you. You had reflected a little bit on trying to manage workloads, and we know there's, I think, a lot of capacity, not only in our public yards, but also in our private yards, and trying to make sure that we understand where those strengths are so we can utilize those to keep off of the roller coaster ride of troughs and peaks with management of workload in both the public and private sector. Can you give us a little reflection on what you are doing in looking at the total workforce management across both the private yards and public yards?
That's a great question. So I'll answer it in two different ways. One is for the four public shipyards, we have very good tools that give us site visibility of our workload. On a quarterly basis, we sit down and you may have heard the term one shipyard, one nuclear shipyard used before. So on a quarterly basis, we sit down with that workload and share that with our private sector partners, predominantly Electric Boat and Huntington Ingalls, and they come to the table with what's on their plate as well. And so we do get down to trade skill level specific discussions on looking over the future and what's the opportunity for some workload balancing and sharing. We've also gone through a very purposeful exercise over the course of the last year to understand qualifications. So when somebody's qualified as a welder here, what does qualified for a welder mean here? And so we've rectified some of the deltas such that when somebody shows up, there's not a requalification to our standards thing. Here's some interesting and critical safety and environmental issues that might be specific to a location, but then your tool bag and tool belt, you're down working on the job. So that's within the naval shipyards, and part of that is that visibility of the workload. We're evolving into that with the private sector in the surface ship world as well. And so that's more work to follow, but we're using the same model.
Very good. I want to finish with one question to play out a number of different scenarios. As we talked about, the Navy has looked at how to understand the industrial base, the capacity there, but also things to better manage the workload. And we've been through these periods before where we hit some bumps in the road, and that uncertainty creates issues with our workforce. Has the Navy thought of some of these scenarios? And I want to play a couple out. One is bringing forward deployed ships back to the United States to have work done here for those maintenance availabilities that may exceed 6 months, so the longer-term work to be brought back stateside. Using available congressionally approved appropriations to expedite the current cruiser modernization process to kind of, again, create some workload there where you can manage those peaks and troughs. Looking at implementing public-private partnerships in the long term to do non-core work on our fleet. Also, you could outsource lower priority work, such as the work on Los Angeles class submarines, out to the private yards to again kind of manage that workload that normally processes through our public yards. And then looking at allocating all of your available appropriations, including your base and overseas contingency operation funds or appropriations, to mitigate these workload fluctuations that we've seen here recently. Can you kind of give me your perspective on some of those scenarios as how you would see those as part of your management process?
Sir, I believe we use some of those flexibilities already, and obviously there's probably more room to use some of those within the constraints of, I'll say, some existing policies, Navy policies. But like, for example, the outsourcing of lower priority work within the naval shipyards, when we have site visibility of where that kind of, I'll say, that cut line of resources is, that's absolutely one of the levers that we go off and try and pull. As far as some of the other examples that you got, I think I would take that as a lookup for us to come back and maybe give you some more detail.
That would be great. If you could take those scenarios for the record so we can just play those out. And in closing this, I'd also like to have from you for the record, if there are things that the Navy needs administratively or statutorily from Congress to facilitate greater flexibility in helping you in managing the workload, but also managing workforce in both the public and private side. We'd like to know that too, because there may be some things that we can do in next year's NDAA to help facilitate what you can do to better manage that workload and workforce.
Yes, sir, we'll take that one.
Very good. Now go to Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good to see you again, Admiral. Just to follow up a couple the comments that the chairman made. Again, it looks like you've made some impressive progress in terms of boosting the hires in the last year or so. Secretary Perez, U.S. Department of Labor, was up in Groton last summer where, again, there's nothing as dramatic as what's going on with the public yards, but clearly, the need, if nothing else, the sort of a generational refresh is sort of got the apprenticeship program sort of open for business again. One of the apprenticeship programs we visited was at the Welding area, and you had actually 2 generations of welders that were sort of doing the presentation. One who was in his 60s, another who was his son, who was actually in his sort of late 30s, early 40s, and they were talking about sort of, I think I heard you as I just came in, is, what is a welder? Again, you can hire someone and put them in that job classification, but what we heard that day was that, really, aside from sort of the initial apprenticeship stint, I mean, the fact of the matter is you need somebody looking over the shoulder of that new person for some period of time, I mean, year, 2 years or so. And then they can sort of start doing sort of basic welds. But in terms of, a real sort of master welder, I mean, you're talking years before you really have sort of, got that person up to qualification. And frankly, there's a lot of risk in terms of, retention, because there's, with advanced manufacturing just sort of taking off in aerospace, you name it. The fact of the matter is that, sort of holding on to these folks, it really makes sort of the initial numbers that we see in today's testimony, I mean, really just sort of the beginning of the challenge for, having a workforce that's ready to take on these challenges. And I was sort of wondering, I mean, have you sort of built in sort of, the fact that there's going to be attrition over the time period, and frankly that, there's still a gap in terms of timing to get people really up to doing these. You don't want mistakes. I mean, you know better than anybody in terms of submarines or surface ships in terms of bad welds or people who, really aren't ready for the job.
Yes, sir. Extremely salient point. So one of the things that we are doing differently, acknowledging some of that generational difference in the learning, is I'll call it a deep immersion. We talked about it a little bit earlier. A place where it's safe to fail. So welding is a great example, where what we would have done previously is a little bit more of that over-the-shoulder, learn as you go. We can't afford years for somebody to get that proficient. The sense of urgency behind what the workload is in front of us, we have to accelerate as much as we can the proficiency and experience of the new workforce that's coming in. One of the places that we're doing that is what we're calling learning cells, learning centers. It's off the ship. It's the best example is actually up at Portsmouth, where we took whole tanks from a submarine that Puget Sound Naval Shipyard was dismantling, put them out at Portsmouth, and are using them as real live examples of blasting and painting. So new employees are coming in and in real submarine tanks, in real cramped submarine tanks, learning over and over and over again all of the techniques necessary to be extremely proficient, way quicker than what we would have trained them to before. Welding is another example. So a combination of virtual welding, which can get somebody who comes off the street and has no idea how to weld, but they can learn pretty quickly with a virtual welder. And then transition into a learning center where they weld upside down using a mirror over and over and over again in a safe-to-fail environment that's not causing rework down on the deck plate. So it's an opportunity for us to bring left the timeline for proficiency, but it is somewhat trade-specific. But that's the journey that we're on right now, and it's a recognition that we have to make that investment quickly, because one of the things that will keep somebody on the job and in the service is job satisfaction. Doing that connection to patriotism of getting the job and the job satisfaction of doing it right the first time. That's an intangible that we're counting on. The other part is acknowledging that as we're hiring, we do see the backside of the peak, and so we're watching that attrition very, very carefully. We've got very good data of the folks that are in the two different government retirement systems. We kind of know what the sweet spot is, and we're also having the very purposeful conversations with the workforce so that we know kind of when they're planning on leaving. So we're dialing it in very, very carefully to make sure that we're staying in control of it.
Mm-hmm. So, well, again, I think it's good that you're trying to do things, differently because of the challenges, as we saw that day with the secretary. It's just not, again, giving someone a job classification. So I was also struck by, Admiral McCoy, when he used to testify before us on these types of issues, he used to call a nuclear welder the equivalent of a brain surgeon in terms of, what it takes to be in that, totally qualified area. And again, brain surgeons don't, start going to the operating table in a year or two. I mean, it's a process that takes a very long period of time. Mr. Whitman asked the question about, using the private yards for some of the Los Angeles class work. I guess the other question is that when under Admiral McCoy, there was a lot of discussion again about dips and using road work as a way of, again, protecting the workforce. Can you give us some numbers in terms of, what the road work, programs look like today?
So the road work, you're talking about
Again, so for
that
example,
filler-
if there's a layoff at Huntington or BAE or Electric Boat, whether or not, given the fact that you need this workforce, I mean, whether you're using road work as a way to fill that, and clearly that's been done in the past. I'm just sort of wondering where we are in terms of the numbers today.
Yes, sir. So I can get back to you with some specific numbers, but we are absolutely relying and using right now road work, specifically on the aircraft carriers and to some degree on the submarines, but more so right now. One, because we've got 3 aircraft carriers in execution right now, all at the same time. About to add a 4th with the start of the Ronald Reagan over in Japan. That's a big chunk of aircraft carrier. At the same time, the Huntington Ingalls is stepping into their valley. Then it becomes a timing to make sure that we can align the timing right, and we're working on that every day. So I can take for specifically the numbers for you. Yes,
Yeah, I mean, again, because it was a pretty successful approach a few years ago, and I think, again, Admiral McCoy, to quote him, talked about sort of the notion of a one shipyard approach, because, and I think Roscoe Bartlett used to say it's like having 6 horses and food for 5 sometimes, in terms of trying to, satisfy the industrial base or keep people working, and trying to, balance that. I think is a pretty successful strategy.
yes, sir. I agree with that.
Yep. So, we would look forward to those numbers. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Ms. Badalio?
Thank you. I have just one question, Admiral. It has to do with the MSC ships, which are normally in our shipyard. Where does the maintenance of the MSC ships fall into the OFRP process, and how would any delay in maintenance of the MSC ships affect the carrier strike group readiness?
Ma'am, that's a little bit outside of my swim lane. I'd be glad to take that one for you, and we'll get you back a specific answer.
Thank you very much, Admiral, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bardallo. Mrs. Hartzler, do you have any more questions? Any members have any additional questions? All right. Admiral Whitney, thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. We've, I think, given you a few questions for the records, too, so that we can clarify in our minds some of the things that are going on. But please let us know, too, if there are things that we can do specifically to give you the necessary flexibility in managing both workload and workforce. So we look forward to working with you to make sure we enable you to make sure our ships get in and get maintained so they can get back to sea with our great sailors on board and do the great job for our nation, and make sure that our sailors and their families are happy with their deployments. So,
Thank you, sir. Honored to be here.
thank you.